From stormy weathers to home intruders, tonight's stories would definitely freak you out. Welcome to Haunted Midnight. Here are 3 true disturbing home alone stories. Before we begin, if you enjoy true authentic horror stories, which would give you the chills, then why not subscribe to my channel and support me to upload more content? It doesn't cost you anything, and you would always have new stories to hear. Thank you for watching.
It was a dark and stormy Saturday night when I found myself home alone again. My parents were away at some work banquet, leaving me with an empty house to myself. I had been looking forward to a night of popcorn, movies, and junk food binges while they were gone. But as I settled into the living room and pressed play on a new horror flick, the weather outside took a turn for the worse. The wind whistled through the old oak trees and sent branches scraping at the windows. Rain pounded the roof in rhythmic waves. I tried to ignore the storm and focus on my movie, but a particularly loud crack of thunder made me jump. As the rumbling faded, I realized I could hear a new sound, a faint but distinct scraping coming from somewhere upstairs. My first thought was that it was just the house settling in the storm or tree branches blowing against the side. But as I muted the TV to listen closer, the scraping continued in a deliberate, repetitious pattern. It almost sounded like slow, heavy footsteps pacing back and forth across the attic floorboards directly above me. But that was impossible, right? I sat frozen on the couch for several minutes, listening to the methodical creaking footsteps overhead. That attic was always kept locked and empty for storage. My parents had even warned me never to go snooping around up there. But with them gone for the night, suddenly my curiosity was sparked. What if someone was lurking in our attic without us knowing? Ordinarily, I would have brushed off the noises as my imagination playing tricks. But home alone in the middle of a stormy night, I felt a creeping unease. I knew I should probably call my parents or the police, but the fantasy of discovering some ghostly squatter in our attic intrigued me. First, I wanted to investigate just a bit on my own. I tiptoed upstairs in my socks, wincing as the old steps groaned beneath my weight. At the entrance to the attic, I paused, ear pressed to the door. The creaking footsteps continued their unhurried march above my head. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out and tried the doorknob, still securely locked as always. I considered knocking, calling out, but a flash of lightning illuminated the dark hallway, just as an especially loud creak sounded from the attic. The ominous timing sent a shiver down my spine and stopped my voice in my throat. Maybe this wasn't such a great idea after all. I retreated back to the safety of the living room, but left the TV muted. I couldn't focus on the movie while that skin-crawling creaking continued upstairs. Had I really heard something moving around up there, or was the storm playing tricks on my mind? Suddenly, home alone didn't seem like such a great idea anymore. The smart thing to do would be to call my parents, or the police if necessary. But the creaking was so unpredictable, continuing steadily for a while, then pausing, then picking back up. I worried that by the time anyone got here, it would have stopped. Then they'd just think I was a paranoid scaredy cat who let the storm spook me. As I sat anxiously debating what to do, the creaking grew louder and more frantic. Heavy footsteps pounded across the attic floors, no longer sticking to any pattern. It sounded like someone pacing rapidly back and forth. That settled it. I couldn't ignore this. Gripping my cell phone tightly, I dialed 911. The dispatcher advised me to wait outside or in an interior room for the police to arrive. But I was too freaked out to leave the house with something upstairs. Instead, I grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet for protection and planted myself on the bottom step. Sitting there clutching the smooth wooden bat, I strained my ears toward the attic. The frenzied creaking continued as I silently pleaded for the police to hurry. After what felt like an eternity of sitting alone jumpier than ever, I finally saw flashing patrol lights pull up outside. 2 armed officers entered the house while another stayed by my side. I recounted everything I had heard from the attic since that evening. The slow, purposeful pacing, the increased frantic creaking. Above our heads, almost as if in response, the footsteps accelerated even faster. The 2 officers drew their weapons and cautiously climbed the stairs. At the attic door, they paused, communicating with silent gestures. On some unspoken signal, they threw open the door and flooded the attic with light, shouting, "Come out." We were in there. The officers inspected every inch while I held my breath, waiting to see who or what would be flushed out, but the attic appeared empty as always. After finding no signs of break-in or entry, the officers concluded no one could be hiding up there. But I knew what I heard, and that scraping, creaking thing knew I was onto it. The officers searched the rest of the house just to reassure me, even checking inside closets and under beds. Of course, nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. Old houses make lots of odd noises in bad weather. The officer explained sympathetically as they prepared to leave. I nodded, almost believing it must have been just a trick of the storm. But deep down, I couldn't shake the terrifying certainty of those fluctuating footsteps. Someone, or something, had been pacing in our attic that night, and I feared what might be lurking up there still, hiding just out of sight. Needless to say, I slept on the couch with every light on that night. In the morning, everything seemed less ominous. Yet I'd still had to check that attic myself. I retrieved the key and steeled my nerves as I creaked open the door. I flipped on the light, expecting to see a squatter or a ghost, but there was nothing unusual, just dust-coated boxes and furniture. I told myself it had all been my imagination, a soundtrack of fear conjured up by the storm. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and dark, I'd still hear those muffled creaks and scrapes from above. My eyes squeeze shut, my body tenses until the sounds pass. The police searched thoroughly and found nothing lurking in my attic that night. But in the deepest depths of my mind, I fear whatever was pacing overhead is still there, waiting for its chance to reveal itself once more. It was a quiet Tuesday night like any other. At 15 years old, I was used to being home alone for a few hours while my parents went to dinner with friends. I had just finished eating some leftover pizza and was lounging on the couch watching TV when my cell phone suddenly rang. I glanced at the caller ID and saw it was our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, from across the street. "Hello," I answered. Mrs. Patterson sounded frantic as she explained that she had just seen a very suspicious-looking man lurking around the outside of my house. She said he was dressed in dark clothing and kept peering in the windows before disappearing around the back corner. My spine tingled with unease as I got up to peer out the front windows. I didn't see anything amiss in the front yard. Mrs. Patterson urged me to be careful and keep the doors locked. I quickly reassured her I would be fine and that my parents would be home soon anyway. After hanging up with her, I tried to convince myself it was probably nothing. Perhaps it had just been a lost dog walker or someone cutting through the yard as a shortcut. But I couldn't deny the uneasy feeling creeping up on me. I double-checked that the front door was locked before walking through the first floor and closing all the blinds. Once the downstairs was secure, I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom and waited. I kept straining to hear any noises over the running faucet, but there was only silence. After about 10 minutes had passed without incident, I started to relax again. Clearly, Mrs. Patterson had just been overreacting or mistaken about what she saw. I took a deep breath and laughed at myself for feeling so paranoid. I left the bathroom and headed back downstairs to keep watching TV, ready to put the whole thing out of my mind. But just as I had settled comfortably onto the couch again, I froze at the sound of loud banging coming from the back of the house. Someone, or multiple people, were clearly trying to break in through the back door. My whole body tensed in fear as the banging continued, joined now by the sound of glass shattering. Within seconds, heavy footsteps entered inside. I could hear at least 2 different male voices. My mind raced. Who were they? What weapons did they have? What did they want from my house? My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and I sprinted on trembling legs to hide in the downstairs storage closet. I buried myself deep among the jackets and boxes, praying the intruders wouldn't find me here. I tried to steady my shaky breathing, certain they would be able to hear my pounding heart. The intruders moved slowly from room to room as I huddled there in the dark, listening to them overturn furniture, smash items off shelves, and rummage through drawers. It sounded like they were looking for something specific, but I had no idea what. I squeezed my eyes shut, imagining them holding weapons, or turning their rage on me if they discovered my hiding spot. After several agonizing minutes, I heard them make their way upstairs, stomping around what sounded like my bedroom and parents' room. I considered making a run for the front door, but couldn't will my paralyzed muscles to move. Muffled banging and slamming echoed from the upstairs rooms as I pictured them invading my most personal spaces. Eventually, their footsteps descended the stairs again, and my heart dropped. They were coming back down to the main floor. I held my breath and pressed impossibly farther into the closet corner as they moved about in the kitchen just on the other side of the door. The silverware drawer screeched open and slammed shut again. Were they grabbing knives to use as weapons? Next, I heard them overturning the heavy furniture in the living room. They were clearly ransacking the entire first floor now. I squeezed my eyes shut and braced for the closet doors to swing open at any second. But the footsteps moved away again, toward the back of the house. I finally breathed a silent sigh of relief. The sound of objects crashing and breaking continued intermittently for the next 10 agonizing minutes. I had no concept of time squatting there in paralyzed silence, only the pounding of blood in my ears. Finally, I recognized the unmistakable squeak of the front door swinging open. They were leaving. I waited almost 20 minutes after the last sounds of rummaging before cautiously emerging from the closet. I stepped out into an eerie quiet, the only noise the pounding of my frenzied heart. I moved slowly through the rooms, taking in the chaos left behind. Drawers emptied onto the floors, cabinets left gaping open, broken glass, and ripped furniture cushions littering every room. But the intruders were indeed gone. I quickly slammed the front door locked again and grabbed the house phone with a shaking hand. My voice trembled as I explained what had happened to the 911 operator. Within minutes, I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder and nearer. I sagged in relief against the front door as I watched police cars pull up outside, followed quickly by an ambulance. I recounted the terrifying events again to the officers while paramedics checked me for any injuries. Once the police had swept the house to confirm my safety, I finally felt the panic subside, slightly knowing the worst was over. The intruders were gone, and I was thankfully unharmed. My parents arrived home just as the police were wrapping up their investigation, frantic with worry until they saw me standing there on the front steps. I collapsed into their arms, the fear of the last hour hitting me fully in the safety of their embrace. Later that night, alone in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I knew sleep would not come easy. I glanced around at the familiar shapes, the dresser, the photos on the wall, the closet door, now all tinged with menace after the intrusion of those violent strangers into my private spaces. Exhaustion must have eventually taken over, though, because the next thing I knew I was waking up to early morning sunlight filtering in our window. The terror of the previous night already felt slightly more distant after a few hours of rest. But I knew a feeling of unease would linger within these walls for a long time, like a shadow left behind by a nightmare. I would have to relearn how to feel secure in my own home again. As I reluctantly shuffled out of bed to face this uneasy morning after, I tried to reassure myself that the worst was over now. Those intruders were gone and I was safe. In time, that truth would sink back into my bones, and this house would learn to be a haven again. It was a cool autumn night when this horrific experience happened. The wind was howling outside and rain pattered heavily against the windows. I was home alone for the weekend since my parents had left town on a business trip. They didn't like leaving me, a 15-year-old, unsupervised overnight, but I had convinced them I'd be fine. I was mature for my age and had stayed home alone a few times before without any issues. That's why they reluctantly agreed, not knowing the terror that would unfold. I had spent that Saturday evening casually eating popcorn and watching a horror movie marathon. Fake blood and screams blasted from the TV as the hours ticked by. I knew I shouldn't indulge in such frights home alone, but I couldn't help myself. Around midnight, I started dozing off on the couch amidst the chilling screams from the screen. Thunder cracked outside, jolting me awake. Then came a bright flash of lightning, causing the power to flicker. I hesitantly turned off the TV and headed upstairs to get ready for bed. The house was dark and quiet, only the sound of rain and wind filling the air. As I brushed my teeth, I kept catching my reflection in the mirror, my imagination turning every passing shadow into an intruder. I laughed at myself for being so jittery after the scary movie binge. I changed into pajamas and settled into bed, turning on some ambient music to drown out the storm. As I drifted off to sleep, a loud bang downstairs startled me upright. My chest tightened as I sat frozen, listening intently. Then came another jarring noise, a pounding knock right on the front door. I glanced at my phone. It was almost 2 a.m. Who could possibly be knocking at this hour in the middle of a thunderstorm? I contemplated staying put, but the knocking became more incessant. My curiosity overcame my fear. I had to see who was outside. I crept downstairs, grabbing a baseball bat that was propped up by the staircase for protection. At the door, I hesitantly peered out the peephole. There stood a ragged-looking man dressed in dirty clothing, his face obscured by a hood. As soon as he saw my shadow behind the peephole, he started pleading for me to open the door. He spoke of his car breaking down and his phone dying. He seemed desperate for help getting in out of the storm. Every fiber of my being screamed not to let him in. I called out through the locked door that I was home alone and couldn't help him, but I'd contact the police to assist him. The man's tone suddenly changed from desperate to enraged. He started violently pounding the door and jiggling the handle. I stumbled back in shock, gripping the bat for dear life. The man was screaming now, making threats if I didn't open up. This was no stranded motorist. This was an intruder with malicious intent. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I raced back upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. With trembling hands, I dialed 911 on my cell phone. The operator said police were on their way and to secure myself in a room. As I huddled in the closet, clutching the bat, I could hear the man stomping around downstairs trying to break in. He sounded unhinged, like a rabid animal hungry for prey. An eternity seemed to pass as I sat there frozen, listening to him violently tear through the first floor. Finally, the shrill sound of sirens pierced the air. I peered out the bedroom window and saw the flashing red and blue lights. The banging and destruction downstairs went dead silent. He knew he was caught. After what felt like forever, an officer knocked on my bedroom door, announcing the intruder had been arrested. The officer escorted me outside, past the splintered remains of the busted-down front door. I saw the man in handcuffs by the patrol car, snarling at me furiously. His eyes were wild and empty. The officer explained this man had intended to do unspeakable harm. He was suspected in a string of home invasions targeting teens home alone. Posing as a stranded motorist was just a ruse to access and rob them at gunpoint. In the light of day, the gravity of what almost happened sunk in. Nausea washed over me, thinking how close I'd come to being another one of this man's victims. If I had given in and opened that door, I likely wouldn't be alive to tell this tale. By listening to my instincts, I evaded a predator and spared myself untold trauma. But the image of the man at the door will haunt me eternally. My parents rushed home as soon as I told them the chilling events. They were simultaneously relieved I was safe yet horrified I had endured this alone. I could tell they felt guilty, but didn't blame them. After that fateful night, I refused to stay home alone and developed intense anxiety. I started sleeping with a baseball bat and a chair jammed under my bedroom door handle. Any odd sound put me on high alert. I felt violated knowing the stranger had invaded the safety of our home. For weeks, visions of the intruder tormented my dreams. I'd wake up in cold sweats, heart racing. At the suggestion of a therapist, I started journaling to process my trauma. The writing did help temper the hypervigilance and constant anxiety. Over time, the painful memories faded but still lingered in the recesses of my mind. I knew the shadow of that horrific night would always be with me. Now, I make sure to warn friends about being aware of potential dangers when home alone. I advocate taking precautions and going with your gut, no matter how paranoid you feel. Intuition exists for a reason, to detect threats and keep us safe. We must listen to those inner warnings instead of ignoring them out of politeness or fear of embarrassment. While I'm forever changed by that chilling experience, I'm thankful my intuition spared me from further harm. My home alone nightmare taught me at a young age to trust my instincts in order to stay safe, even if it means slamming the door on someone in need. It's a lesson that very well may have saved my life. If you enjoyed these stories, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you had similar encounters, please share your experiences too. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe as it supports me a lot.